Hi, Andy. How you doing?
I'm good, Shelley. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Are you liking being home?
I'm always home. So it's not really that much different for me, but I am
Well,
going to have my husband here. So that's
right,
fun.
right. Well, I want to thank you for agreeing to talk to us about the project that you're working on. And I want to make sure that, we get this shared out so people will understand about documenting a community. So for the viewers that are watching, what we're looking at, Andy's going to talk about the Esmont community down in Albemarle County, Virginia, and share about her project, any challenges that she might have, how the community might help her, but what's also some of the exciting things that she might be learning about on the community. Because one of the first things a family tree girl always says is know the law and know the community, the faith of the people, and follow the water and
Mhm.
follow the land. So those are tips to people researching for their ancestors is to follow. So we're going to talk about Community Day. So tell us about your project on Esmont.
Sure. So I was brought in by the Friends of Esmont, which is a community organization that is trying to sort of bring Esmont back to its heyday. And so we'll talk about when that heyday was and how long it was in a minute. But their idea is to restore some buildings, to put in some walking trails, to do some historical markers, to try to help people know the story of this little rural town. I'm going to share my screen here so that you guys
Okay,
can see. This is, if it will come up for us,
it's coming.
this is,
Beautiful.
yay. This is a map that Eric Erkentoff from Charlottesville has done. It's of historical Albemarle in Charlottesville. And so I've centered it. You can move it around. It's really nice and movable. But this is Esmont. And if we zoom out a little bit, you can see that Esmont is in the southeastern corner of Albemarle County. And so Charlottesville is up here.
Okay,
Over
I don't see where
here,
you're, oh, there you go. I see Esmont, and
so
it's
here's
right by
Esmont.
that little green
Yeah,
marker, which is for a school, it looks like down there.
right, exactly. And then this is Charlottesville. This is Fluvanna County. This
Okay,
is Buckingham County, and this is Nelson County.
okay,
So,
and I'm in Fluvanna.
right, you're over here, a little bit
Yep,
off the screen, up
yeah.
here.
So I'm
So
east.
you're
I'm
east,
east.
that's
Yes.
right. And
Okay.
so Esmont has always been and is still a pretty rural community. So if you know the area at all, this road here is Route 6, also called Irish Road in the
Okay.
records. Esmont sits on the intersection of Irish Road, I should say Esmont Village sits on the intersection of Irish Road and Esmont Road right here.
Okay. I
But
see Irish Road down on what I'm viewing. Irish Road is down under the word of Esmont when I'm looking at
yes,
the map.
exactly. So here, and it runs all the way across. So the town of Scottsville, which if you know the Waltons from the TV show, that's where they
Yes.
went to the Dewdrop Inn. And
Oh
the
gosh, yes.
yes. And then Schuyler is actually where the Hamner family was actually the inspiration for the Waltons. They lived over here. So
Okay.
Esmont is kind of between the two places that the Waltons went. But Esmont Village itself was only sort of the hub of the community from about the very early 20th century till about 1960. And I'll explain why that was in a minute. But
Okay.
before that, there was this community called Porters.
What is
And
it?
it, Porters, I'll zoom in a
Porters.
little bit so you guys can
Like
see it.
Porter's Road?
Yes, exactly. So this is
Okay.
Porters Road right here. And it
Okay.
runs all the way up to Plank Road, which was the big east-west thoroughfare in that part of Albemarle. And
Okay.
this community is largely African American and has been since emancipation in 1865. And then over here, there's another community. This is Chestnut Grove Road. And Chestnut Grove was another African American community.
Okay.
Chestnut Grove's people came mostly from a plantation called Canaan, which was located right here. And their ancestors were mostly enslaved at this plantation. That plantation is now called Liberty Corner.
Okay.
And the people that were enslaved, the ancestors of the people that were enslaved at Porter's mostly came from north of Esmont on plantations owned by the Coles family. So John Coles,
Really?
Edward Coles. Yeah. So all of these
As in
roads are
John Coles, Tucker Coles, and all of them?
all of them. So
Okay.
they owned all of this, was all Coles property back in the day.
Some of that is crossing into the research I'm doing for UVA. I've got a couple of the descendant families are in the connect to the Coles, and I can
Right.
track back. Yeah.
There you go. So
Very
they were all up
interesting.
here, and a lot of their people ended up at Porter's.
Okay.
So that gives you kind of a sense. And if you want to look at Eric's map, it's really wonderful because it has these wonderful pop-outs that tell
Okay.
you about historic locations and things. And it's just cvillemapping.com/map. Really
Okay,
easy,
yeah.
and he's happy for anybody to look at it. So I'll pull out, so now we can just chat. But so Esmont was most well known over its entire history for its soapstone and slate quarries. Even all the way back to 5000 BC when the Monacans were there, that was why they were in that area. They were harvesting the soapstone to make these really big, I mean, like big as my torso, ceremonial bowls. And once land grants started being formed, then plantations started being built there. So one of the questions we had when we started this research on Esmont was, where does the name Porter's come from? And it comes from a man named Resin Porter, who was the first land grant in that area. And he was also the road surveyor. So he named the road after himself.
Yeah.
Not a community now.
Well,
named
that's
after
typical.
Yeah, right. Good old dude just named the road. And then he moved to Prince Edward and didn't have anything to do with Albemarle anymore after that. So he kind of, but he got a road named after him.
Are there any descendants of the Porters still here, or he moved everybody?
They might be in Prince Edward, but they
Okay.
basically pulled out, and I didn't dig further to see if they stayed around for long. But so after the land grants came to people like Francis Epps, you know, related to Thomas Jefferson, the Coles family. Wilson Carey Nicholas, who was a governor of Virginia, had a property down on the James River in a town called Warren. Okay. Warren was the first urban is too big a word, town in this part of Albemarle. Even before Scottsville got founded, there were a couple mills there, there was a ferry, and the James and Kanawha Canal came right through there. Right. So it was a pretty big area until Scottsville kind of took that over. And then once those land grants were established, people started buying and selling property. And so then you get these big plantations. So the Coles family, Tucker Coles, John Coles the first and second, Edward Coles, who freed all of his slaves in Illinois, they all had huge plantation houses. They owned tens of thousands of acres down there. Wow. And they still have ties to this area. There's still Coles in Charlottesville, and a lot of the descendants of the people they enslaved are still in the area too.
And they took the name Coles. Some of them had the last name of Coles. I think Mr. Eugene Williams.
Oh yeah.
Had his line goes to Ephraim Smith, and he was owned by Tucker Coles.
How about that?
And then went to work for Tucker's brother Peyton. And I found a labor contract from 1866. So after he became free, he worked for $20 a year. Yeah. Well, 1866. That's probably good money back then, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and Edward Brooks, who it works for the county of Albemarle, his ancestors were enslaved by the Coles too, by Tucker Coles as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of ties to those folks down there. And that's kind of where the wealth in that part of Albemarle came from, was these plantation owners. A lot of those plantations end up getting sold off different periods to different families. So one of the families that buys some of those Coles plantations is the Van Cleefs of Van Cleef and Arpels. And they still own a lot of property down in Esmont, and they're still very active and very philanthropic in that community. Danny Van Cleef is how everybody calls him. He was like a House of Representatives dude. So I want to call him something formal, but everybody calls him Danny. Like there's a story about him, how he loaned his fire truck, his private plantation fire truck, to the town in case they had a fire. So, and they also built, the Coles also built, the Van Cleefs also built a very big property down there called Nidri, which was several thousand acres. It still is. The property is still there, not owned by the Van Cleefs anymore. And it was a major thoroughbred horse farm for a long time. So a lot of people that, a lot of African-American people in particular in Esmont ended up working for the Van Cleefs over the years, as secretaries, as horse wranglers, as chauffeurs and butlers, and had really good relationships with them. So, but then what happened around the turn of the century was that New York industrial magnates figured out that the soapstone in Esmont was really valuable. And about that time, everybody was putting soapstone in their house and, you know, their big fancy houses. So it was mantle places and countertops and bathtubs. And then it was also used for industrial purposes because it doesn't corrode from chemicals.
Right.
So a man named James Serene, depending on the legend you want to believe, like spotted the soapstone from across the hill. Probably people just told him about it and he showed up and bought a farm. And then he put in a quarry. And eventually the stone that was harvested out of that quarry became called Alberine, for Albemarle and his name Serene. Alberine.
That's where that came from.
That's where that comes from.
Son works there, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's
my brother and his wife down in Floyd County, their whole fireplace, oven, the whole thing is all soapstone.
Yeah, because it holds heat. It keeps heat really well. So it's wonderful. If you can afford a stone stove, get one.
So it's interesting. So you're sharing some of what was there, as far as the value of what's in that area. And when we're talking about Albemarle, I thought the soapstone, is there more than one quarry in Albemarle? Okay.
That kind of runs from what's now called the town of Alberine, which is just north of Esmont, all the way to Schuyler. So where the Waltons were from, and actually at the edge of Nelson County. So we just had a toddler coming in the background, guys. So
that's fine. We'll say hi to him if he pops in. We're all home. We can handle it. That's
right. So there were more than 50 small quarries between Albemarle and Schuyler. And then in the midst of that soapstone, and I'm sure there's a geological explanation and I don't know it, there's a big slate quarry.
Okay.
A big deposit of slate. And that actually is right at the edge of the town of Esmont. So for a long time, the village of Esmont, which was mostly populated by white families, that village came up because of the presence of soapstone and slate. And the people that helped bring that about were John and Henry Lane, who were there for a couple decades. They owned Esmont Plantation, which is where the village got its name. And then they kind of moved on to other things, including building the Lane Furniture Company in Alta Vista.
Wow.
So that's still in existence. So it was them and James Serene and a couple other investors who kind of started this business. And part of what made it really profitable in the area was there were railroads that ran down to connect to the C&O on the James to get the stone out to the places. So there was a railroad from Alberine to Warren and one from Schuyler to Esmont, and they all ran for about 50 years into the 1960s. And that gave people lots of jobs. The quarries gave people lots of jobs. And then trucking became more efficient and cost effective, and all of the industry in Esmont started to die. Coupling with that, the slate quarries, the slate mills in that area were producing this really fine powder, and it was making people very sick. And they ended up actually going to court and charging the Blue Ridge Slate with causing these crimes, and the state ordered them to abate the dust. And the company said, we can't afford to do that, so they just shut down. So the railroad shut down, the quarry shut down. The soapstone quarry shut down largely because they couldn't mill with the systems they had. They couldn't get any more stone out.
Right.
And then basically all the jobs left.
Wow.
So you went from this rural place. For 50 years, it was this almost industrial place, and then it became this entirely rural place again.
In other words, people were able to eat, live, grow
Yep,
because they had income coming in, they had work.
that's
Thinking
right.
about today, right now, what's happening with COVID-19, and our ancestors and folks, families have went through some of this. It might not have been a virus, but as far as the economic piece of it, they've had to weather through the good and then totally shutting down. And I've
That's
been to Esmont several times because I used to go into the school, and I did some consultant work and interacted with a lot of the families down there. And there's some neat little buildings down there. I remember the Odd Fellows building I attended meetings at. And so that was interesting. But yeah, I went to Yancey School, worked with a project at Yancey School. It was an afternoon project. And matter of fact, it was with for Patricia Kluge's,
okay.
her foundation that she had, and she was funding the school in that community. And so the kids became Club Yancey, and they held meetings and fun activities on the Kluge estate, I'll say it that way. And they learned about gardens and the herbs and things that the main kitchen was going to cook with, but the kids got exposed to that. And again, we're talking about 21st century kids
Right.
getting exposed to planting, growing, and food value besides medicinal value, which was so interesting. But it was an after school program for them. And of course, that I think is gone as well because that school has closed and it's several things right now.
Yeah.
So the understanding of a community, I hate to say it this way, dying out, it happens,
Yeah.
and it's kind of scary. But in our research, finding out some of these critical things helps to get more information in one aspect. So knowing about the quarry, I had no idea there was a quarry down there.
Yeah.
Nobody
And
ever said anything to me.
no, and if you drive down Esmont Road, if you're in the area and you drive Esmont Road, you'll go through these big railroad abutments. You can't miss them. They're huge and they're big
Right,
stone,
right.
and they're made of slate that was quarried right there. So
Wow.
it starts to become very clear how all of this was involved. And I mean, I would say the economic system in Esmont is definitely, I mean, there's a wonderful medical practice down there that provides great medical care for the area. There's a really good chicken place if you're like
I've
me and you
heard
like
about that.
ground chicken, so
Yeah,
good. Although they also have a shop in Charlottesville now. But by and large, there's not a lot of commerce in the area,
yeah.
even though like in downtown Esmont at one point, there were 5 stores. In Porter's, there were 2 or 3 stores. Porter's had everything. They had a blacksmith, they
Right.
had barber shops, not a coroner. That's not the word I want. An undertaker. That's the word I want.
Undertaker.
So you kind of had 2 villages because it was
Yeah.
also during segregation, right? So you had Esmont Village and then you had Porter's, and then Chestnut Grove kind of worked with Porter's. But they were sort of historically 3 distinct communities. Now they're all just part of one community. And
That's
they all go to
interesting too.
school. Now they all go to school together. But the
Yeah.
African American community there actually got the schools founded before the white community got themselves schools. So
Really.
the first schools in Esmont, well, there was a Freedmen's Bureau school at
Mm.
Keene, which is just a little
Right.
northeast of Esmont, in 1868. But then by about 1896, the African American community down there had coordinated, and they had built a log school. We're in the process of trying to figure out exactly where that was
Where that
standing.
was
A
at.
bit of research. But then in early 1900s, they had another black school, and then a white elementary school started, and then another white elementary school started at the same time. They added the Negro colored school, which was the black high school for Southern Albemarle for a
Okay.
while. And then they kept adding on as they needed more space until integration came. And then the black students in the area went to Burley in Charlottesville, and
Right.
the students went to Scottsville. And then now, luckily, fortunately, all the schools are integrated. So everybody most of the high school students go to Monticello High School in Charlottesville
Okay.
and go to Walton Middle. And I'm going to lose the name of the elementary school, but they all go in the southern part of the county
Right.
for
Right.
school now, which is cool. And I mean, I would say my favorite part of doing this research has been discovering people have such long roots there, particularly in the African American community.
Right.
Some people, the Boldens, the Careys, the Fagans, the Hudsons,
The
the Fords,
Rushes. You
the
got Rush down
rushes.
there too. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the book that we're working on, we get to talk about Regina Rush's great, great,
Yes.
great grandmother Nisi, who was enslaved
Awesome.
by the Reeves and who tried to run away right after she had a kid and got caught.
Now,
But
now, I
yeah,
know Regina Rush. She
yes,
works at UVA Special Collections, Albert and Shirley Small's collection, and so she's doing a book. Is that
no,
what you said?
I'm putting part of her writing into our book about
Oh,
Esmond.
good. Okay.
Yeah. So
Excellent.
we're really excited
Excellent.
about that. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, we're at the place now where we've drafted the book. The book is in with readers. But we're definitely always interested in learning more. If people have particularly stories, I mean, I can look up the stuff that's, well, mostly I can look up the stuff that's public record, except for right now, the stuff I have to go to see. I can't go see it.
You can't go see.
No, but I did get a lot of that research done. But if there's personal stories that people have, if we can't put them in the book, the Friends of Esmont is always looking to share things on their website because they really want to tell people about Esmont as it was, but also tell people about Esmont as it is, because it's still a really rich community. I mean, that B.F. Yancey Elementary School, sadly, it closed in 2017,
Right.
but it's a really thriving community center. It's also the voting precinct for everybody in Southern Albemarle.
Really?
So, yeah.
Well, and so doing this research on the community, and I know that's one of the first things like I'd look at if I'm researching, I got to find out what was going on. And you've clarified some of that, but what's also interesting is knowing the families and like you said, their roots and some of the challenges. Again, I heard you say the word segregation, and I know there were plantations down there. You spoke about that. So what other kind of challenges besides not getting to the library, the historical societies, or the courthouse, because I know we have at Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society, I know there's information on the families and on the Esmont community. And so, and again, we don't have access, but, and also we have UVA and special collections as far as for our area and the Library of Virginia. And a lot of their databases are available. But are you hitting across any other challenges in your research? Are you looking for more families that might have rooted out of there that aren't here now?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for anything we can find. I mean, one of
Okay.
the challenges is always segregation. Like the records are segregated. Like, so you have to know the ethnic identity of people to kind of know sometimes how to look, and sometimes that's tricky. But also, there's sometimes a communication disconnect between those communities about what the story is. And it's because that people didn't necessarily know everybody's story. And so that's been a challenge. But honestly, I think the biggest thing is that a rural place just doesn't have the same kind of records as an urban place does.
I agree.
I mean,
Or
I'm sorry?
or they're in the house repository, as I call it.
That's
That
right.
means it was in grandma's attic in that box that we were told not to mess with, or it's in the auntie who's no longer here, and her descendants don't even know that it's up there, and
Right.
they were always told don't mess with that box.
That's exactly
And
right.
there's people
Exactly.
that have things in their houses that they don't know, even photographs. And I think that might be another way. If people have old photographs, I think of areas of Esmont that you might not have seen either from a historical society or newspaper type things of something that happened. And, so thinking of things like that. And what would be some of the most important things you would say that you would need to know as a researcher documenting a community,
I mean, I think knowing some of the property records, like you were talking about, following the land, following the water,
Yeah,
sometimes that's really important. And for the most part, we can follow deed records and track some stuff back, but sometimes it gets a little murky, who
yeah.
owned what and who sold who to what and who and what to what. So
Right, right.
that can be tricky. I think other things that have been proven really helpful are just oral histories. I mean, I just the other day learned that all of the communities, and I'm assuming it's the white part of the communities, but I'm not actually positive about that,
Right.
had baseball teams. all from like Gordonsville and Howardsville, all of these little towns had these baseball teams, these rec leagues, and they played like every weekend in the spring on these baseball fields in these towns. And so a lot of the people living now remember their fathers playing baseball. But I mean, there's
I
that's
hadn't
not written
heard that
down.
either. So,
I thought it was fascinating.
to look that up again, you're going to go after oral histories. So I think
Right,
anyone
because there's,
that's
I mean, I guess
listening,
there's,
yeah, that had
yeah,
ancestors from that area, if you got family history or oral history, contact us. You can either contact us through the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society, find Andi's Facebook page, Andi Cumbo Floyd, her Facebook page, your website, or they can contact me wherever I post this at, to share. I think the oral history is really going to be valuable if we're able to, to help you find some more stories to add. I know some of the families down there, so I need to start sharing some of what I know, that I have on the research I'm doing. And it might be a hint or a lead for you for this research.
right. I would love that. Yeah, we're just want to tell as full a story as we can tell. That's,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to do. So, I mean, I think the other thing that's been really valuable is the church records that the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society have. So, Margaret, before she retired,
Yes.
I'm sure Amanda would hand me the same thing if I went in, now the librarian, put me onto the Ballinger Creek church records. And so Ballinger Creek was the first, at the time it was the Anglican meeting house in the area.
Okay.
And the church records tell not only all the white members, but also the members of their enslaved community,
Right.
and who owned them. And so
that's valuable.
yeah. So, and it's pages and pages. I just started taking pictures because I was like, I cannot write all this down. But there are a few surnames mentioned in there. So they'll be in the book on Esmont because I just want people to have access to them, but access to those names. But that kind of information, I mean, what was interesting, one of the facts that was interesting in there is that Ballinger Creek was technically a white church, but only 43 of the members were white and 260 something of them were black. So, I mean, so you're talking about, that's giving you some proportion on what the population in general look like in terms of demographics. And so, I mean, that kind of stuff is really invaluable. And there's no way you would just happen on that. You have to kind of go talk to people and they have to tell you what they know. And it's cool. It's really fun.
But, I will tell you that the Jack Jewett, and I know this from the Albemarle Historical Society, in the library, Jack Jewett, Daughters of the American Revolution, did, and I think it was back in the 90s.
Okay.
There is a book on the one shelf that they documented the cemeteries.
Uh-huh.
And that might be something. and I think it's not just, there might be family cemeteries. And I don't know if Margaret showed you that, but that, I think of the cemeteries when I'm trying to find, is there family cemeteries? And, because I do similar research, and that's one of the places I start looking, and also finding the like I said earlier, the faith of the people. Because I know Esmont's got churches down there because I did a talk at one, and I found out it was split from another one, and they're not that far from each other. And both families are at both, the families are at both churches. Absolutely. So that was interesting.
Yes, you're probably talking about New Hope and New Green Mountain.
Yes, I am. But I didn't know that, but I knew people that went, and I thought, wait a minute, but they're cousins, but they were raised up. But again, there could be, that's oral history too. So I want to make sure I connect you with Ms. Rosa and get you two on the phone because she was born and raised down there.
That would be great.
So, yeah, and she's in her 80s now, so maybe she can share some stories for you and help you get along. So is there anything you want besides us talking to you about, if we have any oral histories, or what's your takeaway that you'd like to share, even if it's tips for people doing this research, or what can we do as a community of Albemarle to help you with the research besides oral histories? What
Yeah.
about photographs or something like that? I don't know. I'm just throwing things out.
Photos would be amazing, particularly photos. I mean, the book, we're stopping the book roughly around 1980, just because we
Okay.
sort of kind of have to pick a point at which
Yeah.
to stop. But early photos, and the earlier the better. I mean, it's just harder to find photos of early African American families. We have a couple really good ones. One at the Oddfellows Hall of the Masons, the
Yeah.
Black Masons down there. Photos are really great. Stories are great. And then the tip I would have is actually something you and I've talked about, Shelley, which is the first thing I did was I just started making a timeline of the community and just literally saying 1908, this was built, 1896, this was done, and just putting it in chronological order. One, because it helped me have a frame of reference for a lot of information, but also two, because I could hand it to someone. It's like an easy handoff and say, tell me what I got wrong.
Right.
Tell me what I'm missing.
Yeah,
And
I got gaps here. Something's not work. These dates don't work right. Something's not.
That's right. And so very quickly, that was a very easy way, one, to get people telling me stories. Because they'd be like, Guthrie Hall was not built in that year. It was built in this year. And let me tell you about this dude that worked, it just becomes stuff. So that would be my number one tip if you're going to do this kind of community history, is put a timeline together of everything you can find.
Right.
And then ask for help to make sure it's accurate. And that can be a really good first step before you start pouring yourself into information that isn't actually going to be right.
And that's good tips to share. And other question is, and this is my own personal question, military comes to mind. Was there any battles or anything down in that area during any of the wars?
No.
And anything. So that's really rural then. Because I even think about Fluvanna County and Point of Fork type thing in the Revolutionary War. So Southern Albemarle, and again, the NA Center at UVA, were there any Civil War soldiers that were born in Esmont maybe and came out?
There were a few that mostly were associated, the Confederate soldiers from there were associated with Mount Zion Methodist. At least those are the ones that we have records of. Mount Zion Methodist is interesting. It was built by Benjamin Childress, who owned a plantation right away, and he had his enslaved people build a log church for him and his family and other members to attend.
Awesome.
And that white Methodist church still sits in the middle of the Black African American Porters community. So it's kind of interesting. And the descendants of Benjamin Childress still go to that church. I mean, that's the other thing. Maybe that's the other tip about rural communities, is that people tend to stay put in rural places. So asking people about your great-grandparents is probably asking about the guy that owned the house on the corner. It's not like you're like going a long distance. You can
or Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate your time today. And we didn't get to see the little man, but I'll catch up with him.
I hear him on his toy four-wheeler outside. I think he's having a blast.
Well, I appreciate it. And if anything comes up my way, I'll share it. But this is Andi Cumbo Floyd sharing information about her project on the Esmont community in Albemarle County, Virginia. Thank you, Miss Andi, and I'm going to stop this recording.